Judges. Who expected them to be such a hot topic? I mean, who's complaining about judges? Who's an activist judge? Who's an incompetent judge? Who's a judge that's doing all he can or she can to stop Trump? All this news about judges is really unexpected. I had Paulina Luna on. She's the U.S. representative from District 13 in the great state of Florida. She now is joining a new piece of legislation with Randy Fine, who's also a U.S. representative from Florida. And they're looking to stop incompetent judges, some sort of accountability for incompetent judges. And a lot of it probably spawns from that case of the young lady who was an immigrant from Ukraine, who ran from war-torn Ukraine to find safety and a life in the United States, who was brutally murdered on a train in North Carolina. All caught on video. That video was released, and everybody's starting to comment on it. So that case about keeping incompetent judges in check or accountable either spawned from that or is getting more attention because of that. We're going to have Paulina Luna on in just a second on Unshaken and Unafraid with Joe Pags. Later on, make sure you stick around. It's going to be Senator Ron Johnson, U.S. Senator for the great state of Wisconsin, also a Republican. He's out there defending Robert F. Kennedy Jr. from those hearings that everybody saw last week. I mean, the hearings heard around the world. You had people like Elizabeth Warren and this guy Bennett from Colorado going after RFK Jr. as if he's not trying to be transparent, as if he's not telling the truth, which of course he is. There's so much that's still left over from the pandemic times that we're just starting to learn about. Ron Johnson has been the tip of the spear when it comes to that. He's going to be on after. But first, it's Paulina Luna, U.S. Representative, District 13 from the great state of Florida.
This is Unshaken and Unafraid with Joe Pags.
There's a case that's out there that everybody's talking about on social media that's finally getting some coverage in the big news. Well, actually, Fox, I think, is covering it. Not many other people are. It's about a Ukrainian immigrant who came here and was stabbed to death on a bus in Charlotte, North Carolina. I think that's what we're going to talk about here because of the top topic with Paulina Luna. She's District 13 Republican, great state of Florida. By the way, Representative, good to see you again. How are you?
Nice to see you too. Thanks for having me back on, Joe.
I wanted to put that lead out there because I think people are starting to get wind of the story big time in the media. I'm assuming that's why we're talking about holding incompetent judges accountable. I don't think that's why this legislation came out to begin with. There were a lot of incompetent judges, but this one just seemed to add fuel to the fire. Am I right about that?
Most certainly. Randy Fine's the one that's sponsoring that legislation, or actually coming up with it. I'm co-sponsoring it. It's really unfortunate. Everyone that had those Ukraine flag bios have been very quiet. Ukraine flags in their bio have been very quiet right now, especially in regards to the fact that this woman literally fled Ukraine and then was only stabbed to death by a nut job who was left off. I think he was arrested 14 prior times. Clearly, he was mentally unstable, a total nut job. But the fact is that the media, if this was anyone else, would be covering it. And there is a bias in the fact that it touches so many issues, whether it's immigration, whether it's the war in Ukraine, whether it's talking about violent crime happening in liberal cities. But either which way, these judges should be held accountable.
I couldn't agree more. And I want to talk about the media a little bit more before we get full-throated into the judge stuff, because the media is a real problem here. Today, in my inbox, I got some news story, so-called news story from CNN. The news story was the friend of Michael Brown, who was with him the day Brown was killed, rightfully so, because he attacked a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, was killed like yesterday or the day before. His friend was shot and killed at 8 o'clock in the morning. We don't know the details why. And as I read the story, it blew my mind. They go on and on and on about how police shot him and hands up, don't shoot. I mean, all the stuff that we know wasn't true. But again, it was a white cop and a black person who died. The black person who was his friend is now dead because of, I guess, some sort of crime stuff that he stayed for 11 years. He kept on doing it. And then we go to this story that's a young white woman, and again, from Ukraine. Listen, I don't care what race they are, but this is the way the news media is doing it. Not one peep from CNN, ABC, NBC, CNBC, MS. Oh, none of these people covered it. Now, is there something we can, I don't mean legislatively, but can we do something culturally in this country to make these so-called news organizations start becoming fair and unbiased again? Or is that just gone?
Well, I think as of right now, it's gone, but that's exactly why everyone has gone to independent media, because a lot of these legacy media outlets are holding on by a thread. And honestly, X is a lot of times the #1 news platform in the country now. And that's where you're seeing a lot of pushing back on this narrative. I follow this individual. I think it's called Clear Thinker on X, but he's actually a black man, very young black man, very talented. And he's actually showing the hypocrisy in all this. The fact is that it's not wanting to just point out certain injustices, but the fact that you're demanding equality even to covering coverage. And the fact is that there shouldn't be a bias based on skin color. That's completely wrong in skewed reporting. Meanwhile, you can go on X and find a video of just yesterday a young black woman being shot in the head in execution style in the middle of Philadelphia. Wow. And that's completely abhorrent and should not be happening. But again, going back into some of these liberal policies that are destroying these cities, I think that this is just point in case and that it's happening. DC is now, for the first time, thank God, had I think no murder in the last 14 days, which has been incredible. But it shouldn't have taken President Trump to activate the National Guard to do it. The mayor should have been doing her job in the first place. And so I fully support what President Trump is doing in Chicago. I know a lot of gangs. I think there's over several hundred different gangs in Chicago alone, and they think that they're going to be able to engage the National Guard. And I got news for you. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, definitely not. It's District 13 Republican, great state of Florida, Anna Paulina Luna. I appreciate you bringing up what happened in Philadelphia. Let's talk about Chicago a little bit more, and I do want to circle back to the judge stuff. But in Chicago, it seems to be okay to have 54 shootings on a weekend. It seems to be okay to have 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 people die. But again, back to the media, they only care about people of color if the person involved, the perpetrator, is somehow white. You know it's black on black crime in D.C., and the black residents of D.C. are finding every camera they can to say, thank you, President Trump. We're now safe here. We have peace. We have tranquility. Can we go to Chicago? Can you send the National Guard there without some sort of a request from the governor? Can you send the National Guard if there's a sense of emergency there? I mean, what's the mechanism there? You can't do it in D.C. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
so there's a legal ruling actually for Trump to be able to send in the National Guard in Los Angeles, and I think that sets a good precedence in case in point for Chicago. The fact is that right now, again, as you're stating, there is black on black crime, but there's also mass race war that happens with the defunding of the police efforts, which we know that happened with some of these efforts out of these liberal mayors, and that simply is impacting the most vulnerable communities. And honestly, it's the children that hurt the most in all this. So no American child should have to worry about, gangbanger mentalities, these thugs that should frankly be in jail and off the streets anyways. And so I look forward to President Trump doing that. I fully support him in an effort. And for anyone to say that this is somehow, an authoritarian state, well, I'm sorry, but last time I checked, 54 murders in a week is not normal. And to say that you support Black Lives Matter, but you're selectively choosing which Black lives do, in my opinion, that's a gross form of racial prejudice. And I think that these people need to be held accountable and called out for what it is they have. And they always will continue to use Black and brown Americans for their agenda, and they don't really care what happens to them.
Follow her everywhere as Representative Anna Paulina Luna. So let's talk about the judges again. This judge that let this guy out, who allegedly killed this woman, her name is Irina Zarutska from Ukraine. This guy, he'd been let out 15 times, is it 14? So,
I think it was 14 or 15 times,
Yeah, so he's let out, and he shouldn't be on the streets. He does it completely for no reason, not that there could ever be a reason to do it. But that judge is incompetent, clearly. But then when we bring up people like Paula Zinnis, who seems to have some love affair with Abrego Garcia, or you bring up a judge like Boasberg, who just hates Trump, are they incompetent? Or are they just legislatively trying to rule the executive from the bench? Are they the same thing? Can you call all of them incompetent?
Well, they're judicial activists. So if they're federally appointed, Congress actually has the ability via a Holman rule to actually defund their salaries, and we should be doing that. But there's also seems to be sometimes this perspective and reputation that you don't want to disturb the status quo in Washington. And I disagree with that sentiment, which is exactly why you see me support and doing some of the legislation that I'm currently engaged in.
So with the incompetent stuff, though, that would be you just don't know how to do the job. And then the other ones are activist judges. You bring up an incredible point, because Congress made every federal bench. The only one that is in the Constitution is the Supreme Court. So you can literally get rid of a district and just hand it to somebody else if you wanted to. Is that even being talked about in Congress?
It's definitely being discussed a little bit, but what I will tell you is, we do have the DOJ, but there's still obstructionists within the Department of Justice. And so I would say that the DOJ needs to use this time right now to hire as many conservative appointed people that frankly just want to respect the Constitution and uphold the law. And I think that if we can do that and get those people in prior to President Trump's end of term and end of office, I think that would be the best thing that we can do for this country right now.
You got in big trouble recently. How dare you say Congress shouldn't do insider trading? Listen, Nancy Pelosi's worth over $200 million, but her husband did it. She knew nothing about it. Just happened to be legislation that she brought up. Is this going to work this time? Because people like Dan Crenshaw, for God's sakes, is saying we shouldn't have this limitation on members of Congress. Where are you on this?
Well, I think that some of the legislation that we have currently is bipartisan. There's a number of Republicans that support it, and many people agree from across the aisle that it has gotten out of control and it's blatant. What's been interesting is, as you saw, President Trump reposted me speaking actually in support of what we're trying to do with banning insider trading. And same time, coincidentally enough, NBC and CNN are trying to work on hit pieces alleging that I've engaged in inappropriate or not ethical investments, or at least making the implication, because they can't say that, because if they do, then we can sue them for defamation. But the point is that just like there's bipartisan support, there's also bipartisan opposition. And so what I will tell you is that we are not backing off. We are pushing full steam ahead. And I think that if there is one time to get this done, it's this Congress, because of such the slim majority that we actually have the number of people to support it. But I think if I'm a betting person, I think that Speaker Johnson will do the right thing and send it through committee so we can actually mark it up and then send it to the floor for a vote. And if that happens, that's going to be great. But if they don't, then we'll pull the trigger on the discharge petition.
Why is this controversial? If you're bringing up legislation and can vote on legislation that would enrich yourself, that's a problem for me. Isn't it just that simple? I mean, what's the argument?
Over 87% or 86% of Americans support this. And so there is no other argument against it. The people in opposition to it are the ones that are personally benefiting from it. And frankly, I don't own stocks. And what I will continue to tell you is that people will try to push back, but I'm doing my job. I promised the residents of Pinellas County when I got elected that I'd go after government corruption, and I'm doing just that.
How dumb is that the legacy media would try to say that you're doing something that you're actually actively pushing legislation to stop? It's just dumb. Isn't that dumb?
They're having a hard time trying to do it, right? Because they're trying to go after me, but it's problematic for them because I don't own stock. So then they're having to try to twist themselves into knots trying to explain something. But I'm not worried about it. I know what I'm doing, and I know that the president supports it. And so I have the American people and the president on my side. I think we're in good shape here.
The only pardon that Joe Biden signed was one for his son. That's where his pen hit the paper. None of the other ones were done by him. They were all auto pen. I didn't think auto pen should be used for something so serious, and especially all these pardons 100%. Were preemptive pardons before anybody's even charged with anything. What is the oversight finding on this, and is there any way to overturn those pardons?
Well, look, you typically do not sign a pardon for someone unless they're guilty of something. I think that that's just kind of rule of thumb. But right. I believe that this is going to have to go up to the Supreme Court, because the fact is that many of the witnesses that we brought into oversight have pled the fifth. And again, you don't plead the fifth unless you're worried about incriminating yourself. And you don't incriminate yourself if you've done something legal, right? It's when you do things illegally that you're worried about incriminating yourself. So we're continuing forward with this. But I do think that there's a massive scandal here. I think the fact is that Joe Biden might not have given all authorization for those pardons. I think the Supreme Court needs to rule in that favor. And the fact is, we know for a fact it was done by the auto pen, because there's literally no variation in the signatures when they went to forensics. And so we're continuing those investigations, but that's not just the only thing that we're working on. We have many irons in the fire, if you will. And so we are doing what we can. But again, the accountability factor and mechanism comes from the Department of Justice. And so once we find criminal referrals, we'll be sending them over there, and hopefully they can follow up.
Speaker Johnson, I think, is a big player in this, and here's what I mean. I know that you know this. I'll say this for the audience. Mm-hmm. When he was meeting with Biden, when Biden was still in the White House, and he asked him, "Why did you shut the terminals off in Louisiana?" Biden said, "I didn't." He said, "Yes, you did. There's an executive order where you shut them off." He said, "No, that order just said we're going to do a study on it." Biden didn't know what he was signing or what AutoPen was signing.
Correct.
They weren't even smart enough to tell him, "Hey, if Johnson asks you about this, you did that." So is that going to be a major piece of evidence to say Biden had no clue what he was doing?
Well, I mean, that could technically be ruled as hearsay, to be honest with you. So you need the actual physical evidence or direct testimony from people. So I'm just saying from a legal perspective and playing devil's advocate in that instance, but we do need to make sure that never happens again. Frankly, there was many people that got pardons, and I don't think that Biden knew who all got those. And so that's part of the problem here, and that who was exercising executive authority, not being elected to office. And that's who exactly we're trying to find out who will give the authorization and order.
He gave Hunter a pardon for 10 years and 11 months. Paulina Luna,
Wild.
he could have killed 7 people. I don't think he did, but he could have killed many people. That all would have been expunged. What is that? Is that in any way, shape, or form what the pardon was meant to do?
No, in fact, it's not supposed to be going towards personal families also, but that's where you see kind of the gross swamp at B here in Washington, D.C., and that's exactly why I'm doing part of my job. A lot of people are like, you need to focus on legislation for, lowering taxes, which I agree. And we have, with the massive reconciliation bill, we are able to, eliminate taxes on tips, Social Security, et cetera. But also, too, part of my job is government accountability because of my purview on oversight as a congressional investigator. And so I'm able to multitask.
You love this stuff, don't you? I mean, you're getting into the nitty gritty, and you're giving us exactly why we sent you there. I mean, you you light up when you talk about I'm uncovering this garbage that shouldn't be happening to the American people.
Yeah, and I think what I like more is when people get in trouble for doing bad things, and so that's part of my job.
Well, good. Well, keep up the great job. And it's District 13 representative of the great state of Florida. It is Paulina Luna. Let's talk about UAP transparency. They exist. I mean, we know they exist. Why are they hiding any evidence from us? Do they think that we're not smart enough that we might freak out and pull our hair out? Why can't we know about UAPs?
Well, what's interesting is there was a stigma that was created surrounding the topic of questioning. But if you are trying to get answers, let's say, play devil's advocate here, let's say that it's completely a farce and made up. Well, then coming forward and admitting that would do a lot of good for the American people. But to hide it, to stonewall Congress, in my opinion, that shows quite the opposite, in fact. And so what I'm just trying to do is say, look, if this is indeed something real, which I think it is, then there needs to be an aspect of government transparency. We're not the only parliament or Congress that's actually holding hearings on this. In fact, there have been multiple countries that have now announced hearings on this exact same topic. And there's an international curiosity and also speculation on this, not just from a national security perspective, but also from a scientific purview. And so it's my job and responsibility. If we're writing checks, where's it being spent? If there are whistleblowers that are coming forward that feel that they're facing retribution for testifying to Congress, that also needs to be addressed. But more importantly, I think that this answers and, calls to question something that we're all kind of curious about. And so, again, one of the awesome parts of the task force that I've been assigned is kind of looking into this topic. But tomorrow is going to be a great hearing, so you should definitely tune in.
I can't wait. It's going to be great. District 13 Republican, great state of Florida. It's Paulina Luna. When it comes to what you just said, that really hits home with me. If the government says you can't see it, I really, really want to see it. If they say it's not happening, but we won't prove that it's not happening, I really think that it's happening. So you're right. Full transparency. Either they do or they don't. Here's how we know that they do. Here's how we know that they don't. I mean, we should take every topic that way, shouldn't we?
I think that that's a good and healthy way to look at things, especially when it comes to the federal government. Trust but verify.
Exactly right. I know that you've never run for the Epstein stuff. We have these people giving their testimony. One thing I want to say, and it's my comment, I think you agree, but I haven't seen you in person since Mar-a-Lago a few years ago. I'm pretty sure we agree. If Donald Trump were in any way, shape, or form incriminated when it comes to Epstein, they would have released it. They would have burned the entire Democrat Party for 4 years as Autopen.
They would have totally released it.
It would have been out there, right?
Yeah. It would have been out there. They would have used it as a smear campaign against him if he was in any way, shape, or form tied to this during his presidential. And they were so desperate, In fact, Merrick Garland actually said, I believe it was Merrick Garland that said that there's no way, shape, or form that he's even tied to that. And look, even the witnesses have stated that as well. And so what I tell people is clearly we support the victims and we want to have find justice for those victims. However, what I'm not going to get behind is a smear campaign against the president. And this has been taken as a smear campaign against the president. You saw that with some of the signs in back of those victims as they were making their statements. And honestly, it's not like the victims coordinated that. There were professional agitators that were coming in. So I don't support that, but I do support the victims. And I think that with the release of documents, which look, there were over 30,000 documents. So anyone that's like, oh, that's not enough information. There's not one member of Congress that has gone through all 30,000 documents. I'll tell you that right now. But the victims did come forward with information. Their attorneys are working with oversight, and there's a massive investigation that will reveal more information in the coming days.
There's no doubt he was a loser and a lowlife and a scumbag. Having said that, will we ever find out if this guy was a spy for somebody? Because, we don't know what we don't know. Yeah.
Look, the witness lead attorney or the victim's lead attorney had stated that he had ties to foreign governments and actually put that out in a statement with a full briefing of what the statements were from those victims. But again, this is a congressional investigation at this point. And also the victims are currently in the midst of a massive class action lawsuit against one of the banks that apparently didn't flag the information. And so there's certain things that we can't do as members of Congress. We can't use our official position to skew or pressure courts into making anyone decision. So this does have to be handled delicately, and that's from a legal perspective.
Although I grew up in Florida, as you know, I'm sitting in Texas. I've been in Texas 20 years. Any thoughts on what just went down in Texas? We're going to get 5 new Republican districts. 4 of them are going to be majority Latino districts, but Jasmine Crockett is making like we're whitewashing everything. Any thoughts about the whole Democrats leaving the state and the redistricting here and redistricting now in California?
I haven't looked at any of the congressional maps in other states because I know that Florida is also in talks of potential redistricting. But again, we don't know any of that. We kind of see it after the fact. And
Right.
I think that that's how it should be done, obviously, because you don't want to interfere in gerrymandering or any of that. But I think that the White House has a good point in that the census, if they were counting non-citizens, should be redone. And that does affect congressional maps. And then you have this aspect of some of these districts that were blatant gerrymandering. So being able to, reset the wrongs, I think is a good thing. But ultimately, worried about obviously issues here in Florida, but I will say that nationally, I think that it's interesting because California is trying to weigh in the fight. But if they, from a federal perspective, remove the non-citizens from the census, I think California will probably end up losing districts.
It probably would turn red, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
let me just put that. You already know these numbers, but Massachusetts is thinking about redistricting. There are 0 Republican representatives from Massachusetts. I don't know what redistricting would do. California is going to redistrict. It's a 40% Republican state. They're only sending 17% Republicans to the House now. How can they redistrict and possibly make it even less red when you're gonna alienate half of your voting?
Well,
I
and
don't
then
get
that's
it.
the issue too, that of these congressional districts get hemmed up in courts, especially if they are known to be gerrymandering. So we'll see what ends up happening. But either which way, it's a fact because of terrible liberal policies in some of these inner cities, specifically New York City. We have a lot of new Floridians that are now registering Republican, and I will say that a majority of my district is actually a lot of people that have been transplants from New York. So we'll take them.
Absolutely. It is Paulina Luna, District 13 Republican, great state of Florida. Follow her everywhere. We follow each other just about everywhere. Thanks for coming on today. Let's do it again soon.
Thanks, Joe.
Social distancing, masks, shots, who's right, who's wrong. All that stuff is still left over from the pandemic. It's only been a few years, about 5 years since it all started. And we're getting real information now. We're getting transparent information now. What about Operation Warp Speed? What's the story with that? We get into all that and then some. Senator Ron Johnson has been the tip of the spear when it comes to keeping us healthy in this country, making sure that we're informed in this country, and being completely transparent about what's going on, including what's going on with the VAERS system that for years and years was great. And now all of a sudden we were told that it wasn't so great because it was going against the orthodoxy. It was going against the narration that we were told to believe. That narrative, a lot of it ends up being untrue. Now my interview with Senator Ron Johnson, great state of Wisconsin. I think everybody was watching those hearings last week, and I think everybody was wondering what the heck is going on. The Republicans obviously were asking good questions and making good statements. The Democrats, on the other hand, were freaking out. And the man who's got a lot to say about this and a guy who's been telling us the truth about COVID and vaccines and medications and health is Senator Ron Johnson, great state of Wisconsin. Ron, how are you? Good to see you again.
Doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing very well. What was that game last week? Elizabeth Warren and this guy, the guy from Colorado, I can't even think of it, Bennett, I think. What was the game, do you think? Because what they were saying didn't make any sense to me.
I think maybe the best way to describe this is, I held an event with Bobby Kennedy, Dr. Casey Means, a bunch of other nutrition social media types. One of the witnesses was Dr. Chris Palmer. He's a psychiatrist. He does a lot of work looking at how nutrition impacts the brain and mental health. And he was discussing chronic illness. And in relationship to chronic illness, he said, they don't want the root causes discovered. And I think that's largely true. And I think that's what you saw really playing out last Thursday is people do not want RFK Jr. as head of HHS. They do not want to know what is causing chronic illness or autism. Because if we discover what it is, if it's caused by something, you got to assume it is, when you virtually didn't have it 50, 60 years ago. And since about the early 2000s, it's gone from 1 in 50 to now 1 in 31 in terms of autism. And our chronic illness rate is, through the roof. Yeah. I think Bobby said over 70% of Americans suffer from one chronic illness. What has caused all that? If there is something or some things that cause that, if we identify it, that is going to disrupt the multi-billion-dollar business models of not only the businesses themselves that produce or promote these products, but also of different agencies and organizations as well. So they don't want to know. The good news, Joe, is the American people do. Yeah. And again, I appreciate the fact that at least for now, President Trump is standing behind Bobby Kennedy. He appointed him. I think President Trump absolutely understands the power behind the movement of Make America Healthy Again, the power behind the American public wanting to know the answers. what is causing autism? What is causing all these chronic illnesses? I mean, something's obviously happening here. Why have we had our heads buried in the sand for so long? I think that's basically the point that Bobby was making too. It's like, senators, you've been here. What have you done to figure out or support people trying to figure out the cause of chronic illness? Had to fire all these people in the CDC that they've been overseeing the monitoring of America's health as our population has become more and more unhealthy decade by decade. You had to fire them.
Well, it clearly is something that the American people want. I think this is an 80-20 issue. Of course, we want to know what's making us sick. We want to know what's causing autism. We want to know if vaccines actually will work for us and not harm us. And we want to know about adverse effects if there are some. So he fires the CDC director, rightfully so, because she's not on board. And a bunch of others decide they're going to quit or get fired, or they're all demanding that he gets fired, which doesn't make any sense. Literally, we can go back just a few years where you were telling the truth, McCullough was telling the truth, Malone was, Dr. Jesse Lopez, all these people that you and I know very well were telling the truth, and they were told to shut up. So RFK Jr. just wants to be transparent, and every single time some doofus from the Dem side last week would go after him, he would say, why don't you want the truth? I'm just here to tell you the truth. And Ron, you're saying they don't want the truth because the truth might actually cure the problem, and if you cure the problem, Big Pharma doesn't get paid.
Well, or Big Pharma gets sued, or companies are going to have to that are producing a particular product or pushing. Again, I don't know. We have seen the explosion, for example, in the use of seed oils, somewhat correlated time-wise with the increase in chronic illnesses. That's the problem. I don't know. I really don't know. But that's the problem. We should know. We should have a much better handle on all this than we do. And again, I would argue the reason we haven't is because these powerful interests have captured our agencies. They've captured the science. They pay for it. They get the result they want. And again, I think most Americans are wise to that. Now, I also, at the same time, understand the appeal to vaccines. I just saw a recent poll. I mean, vaccines are widely popular. Okay, I mean, I understand the appeal of you get a shot, and that shot's going to prevent you from getting a horrible disease or, possibly die from it. Okay, I mean, I understand that.
Right.
The problem is every time you inject somebody with a vaccine, you are doing something to the immune system. And we've gone from a few vaccines to an explosion in the childhood schedule, for example. We're giving multiple vaccines at the same time. And we don't even ask the question because there's no liability that could be imposed on the manufacturers of those. So we just have an explosion. And I'm sorry, as much as people say, oh, this has been thoroughly studied, the fact of the matter is it hasn't. So that's just the truth. So we're holding a hearing tomorrow. It's really going to be talking about the corruption of science and how that has impacted public perception and public policy, for example, on vaccines. Again, I'm not anti-vax. My guess is some vaccines have done quite a bit in terms of finally eradicating disease. Right. But I'm also realistic from the standpoint that most of these infectious diseases were eradicated because we stopped living in squalor. We dramatically improved sanitation. So most of the progress made in terms of reducing incidence of and death of some of these infectious diseases really happened well before vaccines ever came to be.
It's U.S. Senator Ron Johnson, Republican, the great state of Wisconsin. We will always appreciate the time and the access. Ron, I want to run through some things that you and I have been talking about for 4 or 5 years when it comes to these shots, when it comes to the protocols for COVID and so on. Masks don't work. We now have scientific proof they don't work. The mesh is too wide open. The COVID is smaller than the mesh. We know that the 6 foot distancing was made up by Fauci. He's admitted that. There's no science that says we had to be 6 feet apart from each other or that we couldn't have more than 10 people at our Thanksgiving gathering. We also know that the vaccine does not, or the shot, it's not even a vaccine, does not stop the spread. In fact, many people who got the vaccine got COVID and they got it at a higher rate than those who didn't get it. We also know that there are adverse effects like myocarditis that are studied. We know these things. We know that ivermectin works. We know that hydroxychloroquine works. Why are people on that panel last week still afraid to admit what I just said is absolutely true?
Well, because if you're a doctor or a federal health official or an elected official that, cut a video, for example, and say, get that shot, and then that shot produced what we know from VAERS, more than 38,000 deaths worldwide. 24% of those are occurring on the day of vaccination within 1 or 2 days. they don't want to admit that something that they were recommending to their constituents or to their patients might have killed them. By the way, VAERS, one of the problems with VAERS is it dramatically underreports adverse events. So somewhere like only 1 to 10%. So you take that 38,000 and multiply that by what, 10-fold, 100-fold? Nobody knows because they don't want to know the answer. That's the bottom line. But again, nobody wants to admit they're wrong. Not doctors, not the medical establishment, not federal health officials, not elected officials, quite honestly, not the American public who rolled up their sleeves believing people like Anthony Fauci when they shouldn't have. And they don't want to really even contemplate that maybe there's something still circulating in their body, this modified mRNA. It's not true mRNA, which degrades very rapidly in the body. It didn't stay in your arm. They knew it was going to biodistribute all over the body and accumulate in things like the adrenal glands and ovaries. They don't want to admit that. And so people just want to move on. And that's by and large what's happening.
Well, we can't move on when 80% of Americans took the shot. I thankfully didn't take it. My family didn't take it. But doesn't mean that we're smarter than anybody else. It just means that people were really pushed into doing this under duress. Many of them medical, professionals that lost their jobs because they wouldn't take something that wasn't studied. Why was it pushed? Listen, I know that Operation Warp Speed is something that President Trump is proud of. And as the person who delegates, he should be proud. He said, get it done fast. And they said, hey, Mr. President, we got it done fast. He's not a scientist. He's not an epidemiologist. So why don't we just put the brakes on now and say, maybe next time, actually, definitely next time, let's study it, make sure that we've got the clinical trials we need to find out exactly what this will do. Because you're right, VAERS is for those who are watching, listening, Vaccine Adverse Effects Reporting System. When people put it in VAERS, that's voluntary. They put it in there if they feel like it. If they don't feel like they don't. If their boss at the hospital said don't report it, then they didn't report it. So we have no idea how many people died or had adverse effects from those shots. So let me go back to the initial part. People want to blame Trump now that we know that the shot was bad. He just delegated and said, get it done. Like you're a business owner. You say you delegate it to me if I work for you. And if I get it done and I say I got it done, you just can take my word for it. But it turns out at the end of the day, we should definitely be a little bit more methodical next time, no?
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think that's exactly what Bobby Kennedy's doing. He's not denying people if they want that shot, just provide people informed consent so they understand, well, there are some risks to this thing. But the bottom line is, Trump left office. The injections were just being administered the last month of his administration.
Right.
The Biden administration, they were suppressing what VAERS was screaming at them. I remember, in April of 2021, I met with a bunch of other Republican senators with Francis Collins, the head of NIH at that point in time.
Right.
And everybody else was patting themselves in the back about, hey, we got those testing kits so we can, overstate how many cases of COVID there are, is basically what happened. But
right.
I was the skunk in the room saying, Dr. Collins, are you watching VAERS? Are you watching the few thousands of deaths? At that point, 46% of the deaths were occurring on the day of vaccination within 1 or 2 days because they're being administered basically to older people that are,
right.
More vulnerable to the yes. problems. He just said, well, Senator, we've identified 6 deaths related to the J&J, but beyond that, hey, Senator, people die. That's wow. how callous he was. And so they just wow. sat by and watched thousands grow of that in the VAERS report. They had to, it was overwhelming VAERS. They had to hire additional people just to log all these things in. And then, of course, they started denigrating VAERS. Well, these are just a bunch of crackpot anti-vaxxers just making up death reports. No, they weren't. These were right. reports that they should have taken seriously, and they didn't, and they're still not taking it seriously.
Because they were EUA, and they still are basically EUA, does that mean they can't be sued, that the pharmaceutical companies still have all sorts of immunity? Nobody can go after them? With all the people who died from this because of the false information coming from them and coming from Congress, coming from the executive even. I mean, Biden said it could be a long, deadly winter for the unvaccinated, for God's sakes. Can nobody be held accountable here?
Well, they've canceled the EUA now.
Okay.
But no, those companies were granted pretty rock-solid immunity, liability protection. So I don't see that changing. But all you can really do is try and expose the truth now. But as you saw from those Senate hearings, it is pretty darn difficult to even get a word in edgewise, much less really convey the truth and expose it.
I mean, Elizabeth Warren was screaming that he wasn't letting people get the vaccines that they wanted. She's still pushing those shots, Ron. to this day, all the information you and I have put out there, and you way more than I have, and McCullough, and down the line, she's still screaming that people want the shot, and how dare he take it away from them. And by the way, he said, if you want it, you can still get it. But what is her deal? Does she really not know? Or is it the $850,000 she got from Big Pharma? What is it?
Now, my guess is if she actually looks at the information and realizes, man, we better not be recommending these, that's a tacit admission that they probably shouldn't recommend them in the first place, or they should have been looking at VAERS and they should have been sounding the alarms, but they didn't. So this is, again, they don't want to admit they're wrong. Pulling back on them now and not recommending now is pretty much a tacit admission that you were wrong and people did die and people were permanently disabled from that COVID injection.
Yeah, but those of you in the Senate aren't scientists. She's going to get a pass if she says, man, new information came out. I can't believe that we fell for it. Don't take the shot. Why be so steadfast? No, in the face of the information you have put out in those committees that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is putting out through all these studies that he's doing. Why toe the line now, knowing what we know, I guess?
Because pharma is very effective at their narrative, as is the news media. Again, this is across the board. It's the news media that bought it hook, line, and sinker. They pushed all this. So nobody is admitting they're wrong. So the information is not getting out there. I mean, my chart, I think, to this day continues to be censored. People still want to know the information. And so they're simply not aware. I mean, I ask my colleagues, do you understand what this mRNA really is? That it's not true mRNA, that degrades very rapidly, that it was enclosed in a lipid nanoparticle that was designed to permeate, difficult to permeate barriers. They knew it when staying in the, I mean, I just go right through there, that it actually hijacks the cell, turns a cell into a manufacturing site of a protein that is toxic to the body. Gee, what could go wrong there? They're simply unaware because they just heard, no, these things, they're safe and effective. Again, that's the byline. Everything's safe and effective. Some of the vaccines probably are safe and effective. Some of them may not be. But again, science is corrupted, so we just really don't know.
It is Senator Ron Johnson, Republican, the great state of Wisconsin. Go to johnson.senate.gov. Let's switch gears big time and go into Biden's health decline, his cognitive decline. I think that he was cognitively gone in 20. That's why they hit him in the basement. But as he was in the presidency and as Otto Penn was really running the joint and a bunch of people surrounding him, it was clear that he wasn't somebody who was competent to do that job. When the Hur report came out and said, yes, he did this, yes, it's prosecutable, but he's an old man with a failing memory, and I don't think anybody would actually find him guilty or actually want to take this to court. That pretty much said the guy couldn't talk about documents in his garage, so he definitely can't be the leader of the free world. What are you finding out as the investigation continues, and what's likely to happen? Let's say you find out he was completely incompetent, he had no cognitive skills whatsoever, he wasn't running anything, it was the people around him. So what? What can we do about it?
All I can really convey is the transcribed interviews we've had with his cabinet officials, and we're keeping it to constitutional officers right now. I know James Comer's doing something different in the House. A lot of people are pleading the fifth, but pretty much everybody's towing the line. Again, once again, nobody's going to admit that they were wrong. Nobody's going to admit that they really should have invoked the 25th Amendment. You just can't expect that's going to happen. So I'm trying to just create a historical record. I think it's important that future cabinet officials, future vice presidents realize that when they take that oath of office, they're taking the oath to also uphold the 25th Amendment in case a president is not capable of fulfilling the awesome and onerous duties of President of the United States. We can't afford to have somebody who's not capable in that position.
Is there a chance somebody that was close to him is going to admit all this? I couldn't believe the doctor pled the Fifth Amendment. The freaking doctor couldn't just say what he found as a doctor. Even if you don't want to violate HIPAA, we have the right to know as Americans whether the leader of our country is in fact in good shape. When he invoked the Fifth, did you expect that?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
You know,
all right.
At least, patient-doctor confidentiality, I think, would probably be a stronger place for him to land on.
Right.
But no, again, I'm not expecting any revelations out of this thing. It's interesting that cabinet officials under the condition of anonymity were able to relate as much stuff as they did to people like Jake Tapper.
Right.
So again, people are going to defend themselves, and it's very difficult to prove because if Biden says, "Oh no, I was fully aware of all those pardons," I mean, how do you disprove that?
Well, he wasn't aware that he shut off the terminals in Louisiana. We know that from Mike Johnson. Yeah, I can't believe that you invoked the name Jake Tapper, the guy who made his money on lying about Biden's health and then wrote a book about how wrong he was. Can you imagine that, Ron? You and I do something wrong for 4 straight years, then write a book about why we were wrong about it and make millions of dollars. Come on.
Well, when you're a valued member of the mainstream media, the legacy media, you get away with that crap. You know,
a valued member.
Center, you don't.
Ron, I always appreciate the time and the access, brother. Keep up the good work because I want us to be healthy again. And I know that you've been the tip of the spear on this. And Robert Kennedy Jr., he's fine. He's not leaving office, right? He's good.
I hope not. Again, I appreciate the fact that President Trump is standing behind him. I hope President Trump still does, because the knives are out. They're coming after him. They're powerful interests. And God bless President Trump and Bobby Kennedy if they stick to the mission and find out what the vast majority of Americans want to find out is what is happening, what is causing chronic illness, what's causing autism. We want to know so we can prevent it.
100%. Ron, thanks so much for coming on today. I appreciate you.
Take care.